The short and a little chubby forensic expert, barely uttering a swear word, hurriedly put out the non-palok and went back to the morgue. Muttering under his breath, Andrei made his way into the office, sat down at the table, and continued filling out the autopsy report. Soon the door opened and the senior doctor came in. "Andrei Mikhailovich. Good morning. Did you go out to smoke in sterile clothes again?" Began his lecture with a gray-haired, gaunt physician. "Yuri Vladimirovich, believe me, our clients do not care how we open them." "In sterile clothes or not," said the expert in one breath. "I wouldn't say so," the chief physician objected gently. "The deceased are not just mute bodies. Don't forget that there are things we can't explain." "And that's what the doctor tells me," Andrei muttered softly, turning away. "What do you mean?" "Nothing, Yuri Vladimirovich. Nothing in particular," answered the medical worker with a slight displeasure. "If you have no complaints about my work, can I go back to filling out the protocol?" Frankly speaking, I'm not just checking you." The senior doctor took a chair and sat down. "I'd like to offer you some advanced training. I need someone with your experience and knowledge in another morgue." Andrei put aside the documents and looked at the senior with a questioning look. The gaunt doctor was a little older than him, but already completely gray-haired. "You see, I could just order it, but I'd rather we come to an agreement and you work at another place for a few months. I've worked there myself. They don't bring in many dead people. Sometimes not even one per shift. Don't worry, this isn't an attempt to get rid of you. It's only for your own good. Think about it. I expect your positive answer tomorrow." After these words, the chief physician stood up, said goodbye and left the office, and then from the morgue. Andrew, folding his hands behind his head, spent about 10 minutes, and then left the building and smoked. This whole nervous head doctor thing was getting to him. I wondered if he had met with a psychiatrist. Since the first day Yuri Vladimirovich was transferred to them, they had not developed a relationship. Always some kind of nagging. How not to go out smoking in sterile clothes, how to treat the dead with care. As if they could feel anything. And all that nonsense about the soul and the afterlife. I mean, he's a doctor, sensible and reliant only on science. This doctor seems out of his mind. He even greets the dead, apologizing before he starts work. Anesthetizing children or pregnant women before autopsies when it's not necessary. Seems like he's wasting them. With such quirks he should not be transferred, but locked up in a mental institution. But he has no choice. If he doesn't agree, he'll be transferred without his consent. And if he refuses, they will create all the conditions for his dismissal. He'll be eaten up by his job. But what's on your mind, fighter? Someone called him from behind. Andrei turned around and smiled broadly. It was Yevgeny Ivanich, an experienced driver who had been driving an ambulance since the war in Afghanistan. A short brunette in a paratrooper's cap approached the expert, shook his hand, and also smoked. They stood in silence for about a minute. "Andrisha, I heard that the senior wants to transfer you," Ivanovich began softly and fatherly. "Yes, that's the way it is." Old Harry Yuk, displeasure sounded in the man's voice. "They don't argue with him. He'll eat on the job." "He's right, like a Komsomol girl before the party," said Ivanich. "Move there for a month or two, and then we'll see, maybe he'll get tired of you." "So what's on offer?" "But where I used to work. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, if I remember correctly. To brush up on my skills." "Wow." The driver was surprised, almost dropping his cigarette, and spoke much more quietly. "Andrei, I've heard that this morgue is a hell of a place. They say that there are things going on there that can be astonishing. I had to park just by the temporary meeting room at the time." "Ivanovich, you're going the same way," laughed the expert. "You suggest that I greet the dead and apologize to them before the autopsy like this madman?" Andrei put out his cigarette and threw it in the trash, heading for the morgue. The driver only sighed sadly, wanted to say something, but changed his mind, waved his hand, and headed towards the ambulance station. Over the weekend, Andrei pondered over the voluntary, coercive proposal of the head doctor. In the end, he decided to heed the advice of the experienced Ivanich. Maybe, while he wasn't there, Sidoy would find another victim and keep this correctness in front of her. Yuri Vladimirovich accepted Andrei's agreement with enthusiasm. He offered to drive him himself to the morgue in his car. On the way, he read remarks about honoring the dead and praised his colleague's skills. The more he talked, the more strained his speech sounded. Andrei remained silent and stared out the window, only nodding in agreement. Yuri Vladimirovich personally conducted the initial briefing at the workplace and gave a small tour. And of course, before entering any room, not just the sectional hall, he greeted loudly. He really was an odd type. I wonder if the higher management found this out, wouldn't they think about the state of health of their chief physician? If after 2 months, Sidoy didn't stop harassing him, it was worth considering a secret recording. But to my strange surprise, this time Vladimirovich was cheerful and joy just shone on his face. He was probably glad to get rid of the annoying employee and replace him with his own man. Someone more obedient. Andrei didn't even think about it. Maybe they just want to fire him. So much for advanced training. But the strangest thing happened on the threshold of the morgue when Yuri, seeing him off, suddenly changed his expression and calmly, as if guilty, said, once more, "Andrei Mikhailovich, give my regards to Eliana," and immediately hurried to the car. Who is Eliana? A nurse or someone else? A really strange type. He not only has cockroaches in his head, but a whole regiment of insane stasics from Madagascar. Just a sick man. The shift was boring and hopeless. Not a single corpse was brought in the whole time. And no one ever showed up. Finding a collection of Lovecraft's stories on the windowsill, Andrei plunged into reading. And who would have thought he came up with a wonderful idea to read horror stories in the morgue? Quite original, I must admit. And the prosector was completely replaced by the clammy shadow of bloody Innsmouth. Day changed to evening and then to night. Darkness, having swallowed the light, filled all around. From the adventures of young Olmsted, Andrew was distracted by a strange sound. At first he didn't even manage to realize what he heard. Putting the book aside, he listened warily. And was unusually surprised. From the depths of the morgue came the muffled laughter of children. The man was confused at first, but then grinned skeptically. So this was what Sidoy was talking about advanced training for. Clear as day, the head doctor had hired someone to play a joke on him. To convince him he was right. To scare him so he could preach his nonsense about souls and the afterlife. Or maybe he'd just set up the entire morgue with some kind of sound reproduction equipment. The muffled laughter was repeated. Andrei, reaching out, stood up and left the office. Complete darkness reigned in the rooms of the morgue. The light burned only in front of the exit. From somewhere from the depths sounded a child's laughter, but already ringing. Smiling skeptically, the doctor went toward the sound, turning on the lights along the way. There was no one in the sectional room and the rooms with refrigerators. And the laughter had already stopped at this point. There was only one room left. It seemed to be an extra room where the corpses were brought in when the work went on in kind. A dark and gloomy hiding place hidden from prying eyes. And when Andrei was about to return to the office, from this darkness came a cheerful child's voice, "Shall we play?" From surprise, the prosector shuddered and a sensation of electric discharge pierced his body, causing goosebumps. But he was a skeptic, and such a thing could not be true. There was nothing to be afraid of. Grinning obliquely, Andrew took a few steps forward and, with some excitement, flicked a switch. The lights flickered on and illuminated the empty room. This only confirmed his confidence. No one was there. Perhaps the old head doctor had placed audio equipment around the morgue. Smiling, Andrei returned to his office, extinguishing the lights as he went. But just as he was approaching the entrance, a cheerful child's voice sounded, shall we play? Yes, yes, jump up and play. The medical examiner waved the question away and entered the office, closing the door behind him. He went back to reading. Gradually, Andrei began to doze off, his head began to droop gradually. The man put the book aside and looked out the window. Nothing gave him confidence that there was no hidden camera in the room. If Sedoy had placed equipment all over the morgue, why shouldn't his office be affected as well? But sleep drew him irresistibly into the arms of Morpheus. And at one of those moments, the hem of the medical coat jerked up, then the garment fell downward with force. The heavy silhouette dissolved, and Andrei's forehead hit the table with force. The man shrieked and recoiled. Terror seized him. Someone tugged at his clothes from below, but there was no one there. This couldn't be someone's joke. The dream immediately vanished. The terrified medic ran out of the office and tried to make his way to the exit, but was confronted by a loud bang and rushed back. In the darkness of the morgue, something fell on the cold concrete, producing a deafening metallic clang. Andrew turned around and heard a child's tinkling laughter. The man quickly turned around, his scream stuck in his throat. At the exit of the morgue, a woman with the dull look of dead eyes was waiting for him. Her pale face was yellowish, her lips parted in a sinister grin, and her sparse black hair, intertwined with coagulated blood, was adorned with a dirty white bow. Her lean body was hidden beneath a blue apron stained brown. She smiled even wider, and a childish laugh rang out from her lips. The morgue came to life. A wail of anguish echoed from the sectional room. All the chambers in the refrigerated section opened and stretchers began to move in and out with a loud clang of metal. Andrei, cut off from the exit, ran back into the office and closed the door. He pressed himself against the corner between the old couch and the wall. A knock on the door was followed by a smiling child's voice, "Shall we play?" Andrew shook his head refusingly, but the dead woman kept coming closer. A strange mixture of odors wrought decay, and something old immediately permeated the room. Like in hospitals where the residents are in the last stages of illness and about to die. The conspirator walked over to the prosector, suddenly scratched him on the head, then sat down in front of him and began playing with a frightening doll. She poked the severed male hand at Andrew's leg, imagining that the puppet was bouncing merrily along the path. A silly song was heard from the squeaky child's voice. "Jump, jump, skawk, skawk, skawk. The boy is dead, tomorrow is the day again. And the dying begins again." And a terrified Andrew slumped against the wall, covering his face with his hands, tears running down his fingers. In the morning, the dead woman rose and stepped back a few steps. Her face was pale and sad, and she spoke in her usual voice, "Don't be afraid of me. I'm just playing. I am so sad and lonely. Come, let's have a cup of tea," and turning around, she began to move, hesitating and twitching, leading Andrew away towards the chambers. With a loud clatter of footsteps, she disappeared, leaving the morgue with the silence that should always be there. Andrei waited for his shift outside, smoking one cigarette after another. Gray hair adorned his temples, and his gaze became calm and thoughtful. Instead of another medical examiner, the head doctor arrived, opening the car door and beckoning him inside. They were silent for a long time, and then Yuri Vladimirovich sighed loudly and began to speak. Her name was Alyona. She was a local strange woman who thought she was a little girl. Harmless, playing dolls. You get the idea. She was only years old, but she died of a broken blood clot. We opened her body here. But somehow she didn't go away. She won't find peace. Immediately after she showed up, the morgue staff panicked, and it hasn't functioned properly since. We need someone who's willing to come in here to fill in. Though what if I had died? Andrei squeezed himself out. Died? Because of what? Smiled the older man. No one dies, only turns gray. I, for example, am completely gray. And you still have only whiskers. This is already advanced training, said the chief physician, turning to Andrei and smiled, And in general, Andrei Mikhailovich, I have a business proposal to you. What if you become my deputy? You are an excellent medic, and the only thing you lacked was the understanding that the dead are not just soulless bodies. Many continue to live even after death. So what do you say to the promotion? Andrei smiled drily and shook the head doctor's hand, agreeing to the promotion. Soon Andrei, as deputy chief physician, acquired many of his mentor's habits. He greeted the dead as they entered the sectional hall and apologized sincerely before autopsies. Like Yuri Vladimirovich, he administered anesthesia to children and pregnant women. He became more polite and silent. But, unlike his mentor, he had another interesting feature. Once a month, he asked to put him on shift at the old morgue, where he always brought a cake or a box of chocolates for some unknown reason.